Atheist Alliance International Podcast.
I don't make this stuff up.
You know, if you put Jesus Christ first, that he'll look after all your bills.
It's not fake, it's faith.
Good morning, everybody, or good evening, depending on where you are. Thanks for joining us this week for the Atheist Alliance podcast. And this week we have a very special guest. Professor Steven Pinker of Harvard University has joined us. Just before we get started, I would like to remind everybody to please like and subscribe. So thank you, Steven, for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me, Jason.
Yeah. So I understand you were just telling me you're on sabbatical, and are you doing some research on a new book?
I'm pondering the next book, yeah. A little premature to discuss it since my previous book just came out 3 months ago. So I'm still doing a fair amount of publicity, including our conversation today in connection with that book.
Okay. All right. And how's that going for you?
Going very well. There's a lot of interest, not surprisingly, because we seem to be surrounded by outbursts of florid irrationality, and so everyone wants to know, why does the world seem to be losing its mind? So there's considerable interest in it.
Yeah, and so the title of the book is Rationality, and so as you said, there's quite a bit of, especially with QAnon in the US, a little bit of insanity going on. So now you are a psychologist, but in your bio mentions quite a bit of, I have my glasses up here. So we have evolutionary psychology, experimentals, cognitive. So how would you class yourself?
I usually call myself a cognitive scientist. For one thing, no one has any idea what that means, and so if I don't have to explain to people that I'm not a psychotherapist or a clinician, which is their first guess when I say I'm a psychologist. So technically my degree is in experimental psychology. I'm teaching in a psychology department, but I did a postdoc in cognitive science. For many years, I was in MIT's Department of Brain and Cognitive Science. So I feel entitled to call myself a cognitive scientist, which is, in any case, more accurate than most people's stereotype of a psychologist, which is someone with a notepad on the couch. That is not me.
Okay, all right. And so you're well known for your books, The Better Angels of Our Nature and Enlightenment Now, which came out a couple of years ago, and now Rationality. So can you tell us what inspired you to write that book on that particular subject?
You're asking particularly about Rationality, the most recent book?
Yes.
Yeah, well, for many years I have thought that there are tools of rationality that many academics and social scientists use in their thinking about problems. Bayesian reasoning, that is, how do you calibrate your degree of belief in a hypothesis according to the strength of the evidence? Signal detection theory, how do you make a decision when you can't be certain about what's out there in the world, and there are costs both to making a false positive and a false negative. Logic, how do you know what follows rationally from what else? Probability theory, how do you distinguish causation from correlation? So these are the kind of things you learn in grad school, in many social sciences and in philosophy. But I thought they should be part of the equipment of every thinking person, every educated person. And I've long thought that there, at least at the very least, should be a course in it. And I ended up teaching one at Harvard. Then COVID happened. I put the lectures online. The world had access to them, and the world found them really interesting. And so I was persuaded to turn that course into a book. But as soon as I decided to teach a course and then write a book on rationality, I couldn't just get away with explaining, Bayes' rule or logic and critical thinking, because the first question that popped into everyone's minds is, why does the world seem to be losing its mind if there's if we're a rational species? How can you explain belief in the paranormal, in astrology, in conspiracy theories, in fake news? And so inevitably the book had a chapter on weird beliefs, but also the third part of the subtitle is why it matters. And I made an argument in the book based on some of the conclusions that I came to when I wrote two previous books, Better Angels of Our Nature and Enlightenment Now. Both of those books documented the existence of progress, not as an ideal, but or as a mysterious force in the universe, but rather as an empirical fact. That is, if you plot measures of human well-being over time, they tend to go up, and bad things like war and poverty tend to go down. It leads to the question, what made us so fortunate? And the answer is certainly not that it's inevitable, not that it just happens to a fortunate species like us. It's because of rationality. That is, people made arguments that some practice of the time was indefensible or inconsistent with other values that people claimed to hold, or they applied their ingenuity to alleviating some of the scourges of the human condition, like hunger and disease and poverty. So in the part of the book that fills out the topic why it matters, I try to show, at least informally, that rationality is the driver both of material progress and of moral progress.
Right. So how would you explain something like this QAnon phenomenon? Have you got a theory on why that's so prevalent and it seems to have captured the imagination of this segment of the American population?
Yeah, so QAnon being the theory that the American deep state, government bureaucrats and administrators, but it also extends to Hollywood and other elite institutions, actually house a cabal of cannibalistic, pedophilic Satan worshippers, as incredible as that may sound. And it's one of many conspiracy theories that are out there, that the Twin Towers on 9/11 were imploded by a secret government demolition to justify invading Iraq, that the moon landing was faked, that jet contrails are really mind-altering drugs dispersed by a secret government program. I think there are a number of ingredients that go into conspiracy theories. One of them is, probably the main one, is a version of the my side bias, probably the most powerful of the cognitive biases, according to which people ratify beliefs that are sacred to their team, their coalition, their clique. It could be a political party, could be a religion, could be a nation, could be a sports team. And you gain status within your group for being a champion of the group and for demonizing the rival group. And in doing that, whether or not your beliefs are factually accurate or can be shown to be factually accurate, it doesn't really figure strongly into why people hold them. I think a number of educated elites think that you should only believe things that are true. Now that sounds so obvious that you might even wonder why I would even say something like that. And in fact, I have a quote from Bertrand Russell: "It's undesirable to believe a proposition when there are no grounds whatsoever for believing it is true." Now, again, that sounds boring and banal and trite, but in fact, it's a radical manifesto. And for most of human history, people believed all kinds of things because they were morally edifying. They increased solidarity within the group. They were good talking points in attacking another group. And whether they're true or false, well, no one can ever find out, and so who's to say they're not true? So, for example, the belief that Hillary Clinton was a ringleader for QAnon, or at least the predecessor of QAnon, called Pizzagate, namely that she actually ran a ring of pedophiles out of a Washington pizzeria. It's basically a way of saying Hillary is so depraved that that's the kind of thing she could be capable of doing. And who's to say she didn't? Or even just a way of saying, boo, Hillary.
And there's atheists like us who are, Satan worshippers and evil. So
people like us, and
yeah.
It is relevant to Atheist Alliance International because belief in God, in miracles, I think fall in the same cognitive category. Namely, one of the reasons that people say that they hold it on faith is that there is no evidence for it. And as far as the human mind is concerned, that's okay. You don't have to have reasons to believe things. You could believe things because you think they have moral value, they teach the right lesson, they make the community harmonize, and it's really a post-Enlightenment, post scientific revolution mindset that says, no, you can't believe something just because it makes you feel good or it sends the right moral message. You should only believe things that are true. But we have to, in understanding phenomena like QAnon and phenomena like religion, to which QAnon is often compared, we have to acknowledge that this is a radical change in the way people believe things, that most people, most of the time, believe all kinds of things without any evidence that they're true or false.
Right. So I have a theory on QAnon, that because it's just so outrageous, that this has got to be some liberal pundit who's just having it off with everybody, and he's creating like just the most ludicrous things to see what they'll believe in, because it's just too outrageous to be, something that somebody's actually thought of is actually going on. So that's my personal theory.
Well, here's a related, I agree with you that the fact that it is so outrageous has something to do with how it came into being. Although there's another side of outrageous beliefs. I mean, one of them is that some former writer of The Onion or the Babylon Bee or one of these satirical newspapers, or an ex-comedy writer from a late-night comedy show is just having the time of their life. Like they've floated.
That's exactly what I think.
That's your theory, and who's to say it's wrong? But another one is that there is something compelling about outrageous beliefs as signifiers of group loyalty and solidarity and heroism. Namely, if a belief is obviously true, then anyone can believe it. You don't have to be a loyal defender of the tribe. You might, in fact, just be a kind of a fair weather friend, a superficial supporter. But if you're willing to go out there and endorse some belief that is just barking mad, and actually do it publicly, well, that shows you must be really committed to the cause. And so it's a kind of costly signaling to endorse a truly outrageous belief, which is, by the way, compatible with your suggestion that the origin of the belief was some liberal pundit. Probably the origin was someone who has offered it somewhat tongue-in-cheek, and indeed probably is having a good time watching how it's caught on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so you're saying it's almost tribalism, like an us versus them, that we believe this, so that we can unite behind that.
Oh, it absolutely is, combined with the quirk of our psychology that beliefs can be tribal signifiers. Beliefs are not just well motivated, supported propositions.
Okay. And so do you have hope for American society that we'll get through this period of
Well, I think there's always been conspiracy theories and studies that try to estimate whether they've increased or decreased haven't really found an increase. Now, they haven't found a decrease, which is kind of depressing for someone like me who likes to plot charts of progress. But it is something that is always with us. What it would take to spread the mindset that you should only believe true things, and some outlandish conspiracy theory that just makes you feel morally superior to the people you loathe, that shouldn't be why you believe things. But it's an uphill battle. I mean, basically, it comes down to trust in mainstream institutions. That the reason that people believe things that are justifiable is that they have trust in institutions like government record-keeping agencies, science, academic historians, mainstream journalists, because no one really has the time to go out and fact-check everything for themselves. And most people don't understand science deeply enough to know what the basis is of a proposition. You trust the people in the white coats or you don't. And so the way to marginalize these beliefs would be to reinforce trust in legitimate fact-finding institutions. And to do that, I think the people in those institutions have a responsibility, namely to explain how they came to their conclusions, why it's compelling, to acknowledge mistakes when they make them, which are inevitable because no one's infallible, but to to pull up the curtain and let people see the methods by which scientists are so confident in what they say.
And I'm reminded of the quote by Carl Sagan, and I'm cognizant of the fact that we're coming up on the 25th anniversary of his death on the 20th. That he said, I think he said it in Demon Haunted World, that the education system is not preparing people with good scientific literacy, that we're going to end up in exactly the kind of society we have now. So do you think, a good solid education in science and logic, starting in the public school, in primary and secondary schools is a good way to help fix this?
I think it's necessary, but it's not sufficient, because having beliefs that are consistent with a scientific consensus, it turns out, doesn't correlate that well with scientific literacy. A lot of people, say, who deny human-made climate change are no worse on tests of science than the people who believe it. Even in climate science, people who actually believe in human-made climate change often have at best a kind of squirrely understanding of why. I mean, they think maybe it has something to do with toxic waste dumps or the ozone hole, or isn't it plastic straws in the oceans? It's not that the people who actually are in line with climate science actually understand it. Rather, they trust the scientists, and even more significantly, they are not on the right. A person's political ideology predicts their beliefs in these emotionally charged issues like climate change and evolution more than their degree of scientific literacy. Now, I think people should be scientifically literate, but it should also be part of the just the general intellectual culture in newspapers and websites and media and everyday conversations, that people could cultivate kind of the fancy word would be epistemic humility, namely, you base your beliefs on the evidence. You should be prepared to be wrong. You should update your beliefs. You should, if you disagree with a belief, you should attack the belief, not the person. You should attack the strongest possible version of the belief, not some straw man. These habits of critical thinking also have to be second nature to people. And again, the institutions like governments, like science, like journalism have to earn the trust of people. They can't be overtly political. If people think that science is just a branch of the political left, well, if they're on the political right, then they'll say, I'm not going to believe it any more than you guys believe Fox News. It has to be that these institutions earn their reputation as objective and unbiased, and be willing to show how they arrive at what they claim.
And so we've seen like this mass polarization in the U.S. between the left and the right, and including in the way the media breaks down. So I guess that the media itself needs to have a major reform. I mean, people used to trust like Walter Cronkite, and now you've got Fox News and MSNBC, and like how are the American people supposed to know who to trust if the people they're getting their news from, if they're all in these little information silos and getting confirmation bias from the news channel that fits their bias? So how do we get around that?
Yeah, it is a real problem, and in fact there are very clever studies that show that Fox News, the notorious right-wing American cable news network, has a measurable influence on people's political orientation and beliefs, probably more so than social media, which often get blamed for the current polarization. So there have to be news sources that cultivate a deserved reputation for objectivity and neutrality, that can flaunt that they are objective by showing that they can be on multiple ideological sides depending on the issue, depending on the evidence. But it's a steep hill to climb to have such sources regain the trust of a large part of the population.
Okay. And do you have a credible news source that you like to go to, that you would recommend to people?
Well, I tend to be eclectic, so I subscribe both to the Guardian and the Spectator, both to the New York Times and to the Wall Street Journal. But I tend to I have argued that people shouldn't base their understanding of the world so much on news, and should much more on data, on sources like Our World in Data. .org, because there are built-in cognitive distortions in the news. And this is putting aside any bias, putting aside any commercial motive toward sensationalism, toward eyeballs and clicks. It's just in the nature of the news that it's going to give you a distorted understanding of the world, because news is a non-random sample of the most dramatic things that happen in a given day. And dramatic things tend to be bad things. A shooting, a terrorist attack, a war, a financial collapse. Whereas all the types of progress that I documented in Better Angels and Enlightenment Now are trends that tend to increase by a few percentage points a year, but then can compound. And there's never a Thursday in October in which they make a headline. So I would suggest to people who consume information about the world to spend more time on Our World in Data and other data-oriented sources. And I would recommend to journalists that they put the stories of the day in the context of longer-term trends. Otherwise, they will just push people's intuitions around by the last eye-catching thing they report. And there is a well-known cognitive bias that journalism appeals to, namely the availability bias, which is the more easily we can remember an example of something, the more common we think it is. And so people can fear entirely the wrong things based on the amount of news coverage they get.
Okay. So, but a lot of people aren't really, either they don't have the interest in the data or the understanding, the faculties to understand the data. So
I wouldn't put it, I don't know if I would put it that way, because people certainly consume data on the sports page and business pages and the weather, and everyone understands, anyone who's been to school should understand how a line graph works. But it's just that that's not what you see in the news. You see the shooting that happened this morning, and you aren't even told what percentage of homicides come from rampage killings or police shootings, as opposed to barroom fights and arguments over a parking space and turf wars between drug gangs, and an enraged, jealous spouse who finds their partner in bed with their best friend. All the other ways in which people kill each other in much greater numbers than terrorist attacks or police shootings or school shootings or rampage killings.
Yeah, and it definitely seems to be a problem more in the U.S. So for people who don't know, Stephen and I are both Canadian. You're, I guess, Canadian American. And Canada certainly doesn't have the level of violence that the Americans do. Obviously, we're a tenth of the population, but we also don't have that gun culture either. So,
yes,
I heard. Go ahead.
Yeah, the United States is an unusually violent country among affluent Western democracies. It is probably an outlier. I don't know if it's the worst, but it might be. Canada is somewhere in between the United States and Western Europe. Western Europe being pretty much the most peaceful place on earth in terms of, say, homicides per 100,000 people.
Right. And the U.S. is also an outlier for education and religiosity as well, but we're also seeing that trend going down as evangelicals are now, I think for the first time in the Pew Forum, I think this year or late last year, they said for the first time that evangelical Christians have just dipped below the minority. So that's a positive trend.
It is. I mean, there are in Enlightenment Now. I talk about the trends in religious belief, and you're right that in every affluent country, degree of religious commitment goes down. Now, a lot of these people are not willing to actually come out and say that they're atheists, partly because people are, again, it's in this realm of belief where people don't really care that much whether something is true or not. So it's not as if people kind of go through what Spinoza and Voltaire and Bertrand Russell and Christopher Hitchens went through and Richard Dawkins went through and said, well, the arguments for God aren't really good and arguments for a natural origin of the universe are quite compelling, so I think I'm going to be an atheist. I mean, it's not the way people believe these kind of cosmic questions. It's rather, church kind of bores me and I don't want to pay the dues and it's kind of geeky. And does God exist? Doesn't God exist? Well, who really knows? And aren't atheists bad people? So I better not say I'm an atheist. So people are very, very squishy in terms of what they actually believe. But what they don't believe is the Abrahamic God. One of the reasons people are often surprised when I say that religious commitment is going down, because there's a widespread belief that religiosity is more prevalent than ever. But as you note from surveys like Pew Charitable Trusts and the RPPI, religious commitment has gone down. What masks that, why people fail to appreciate it, is, first of all, religious people have more babies. In all religions, the Orthodox Jews, the fundamentalist Protestants, and the devout Catholics, the Orthodox Muslims, all have more babies than the more secular, liberal, agnostic, humanist, atheist ones. The other one, and this does speak to this organization, is that evangelicals are very well organized politically, and atheists and humanists are not. Atheists, humanists, agnostics, by and large, they don't vote. Or more accurately, the nuns, N-O-N-E, that is no religion in particular, they're perhaps because they're just alienated from institutions, religion and politics, that they're apathetic. But the evangelicals, they all vote for Donald Trump. The humanists, they don't care, they stay home. That's why I think there is a role for organized irreligion, if you want to put it that way, that there are values, there are humanist values. They very much depend on who holds the levers of power, and so there are reasons why we should get out the vote.
Yeah, I think this Bill Maher on Real Time, within the last 5 years, I think he made a point that the non-believers are about upwards of about 25% of the American population now. And he said that is more than African Americans and Jewish Americans combined, and yet they have powerful lobbies. So where's our voice? So yeah, I guess we just need to get organized.
It's as many or more than evangelicals, and so it's the question is even more pointed. But indeed, the challenge is to organize people, some of whom have strong humanist beliefs, some of whom are just, they live their lives and they don't go to church and they don't go to the voting booth.
Right.
Those are the ones.
Given what's going on with the Roe v. Wade and the Supreme Court, there is definitely a case to be made where the secular humanists need to be organized to prevent the evangelicals from basically hijacking the system in America, like we saw in Kansas 20 years ago when they elected evangelicals to the Kansas School Board, and then they removed evolution from the curriculum. So there's definitely a method to their madness and a long-term plan. And it's good that their numbers are going down, but I think secular humanists, we do need to recognize the threat to women's rights, to gay rights, to trans rights that the evangelical communities would like to see suppressed. So I think there's a case to be made on that side. And you're an atheist as well. Your bio said you became an atheist at 13, so that's quite young. So
I never really. It wasn't like I woke up one morning and said I'm an atheist. Unlike my late colleague, the famous sociologist Daniel Bell, tells a story that when he was preparing for his bar mitzvah, he told the rabbi, Rabbi, I've thought about this deeply. I've searched my soul. And I just have to tell you, just to be an honest person, that I don't believe in God. And the rabbi said, "You think God cares?" So I never had a moment. I never had a moment like that. I don't think it was particularly compelling to me in the first place. I think when I was younger than that, if someone asked me, I would have said, "Well, yeah, I guess so. Isn't that what everyone believes? And isn't that what you're supposed to believe?" And then I just stopped. And but I did not have a deconversion experience.
Right. And your family were not deeply religious Jews, presumably?
No, we observed some of the holidays, the rituals, the community spirit. But I certainly, my parents, I don't think they ever brought up God. I was brought up in the Reformed Jewish tradition. That's the liberal or progressive wing of Judaism. My other half, Rebecca Neuberger Goldstein, the novelist and philosopher, she was brought up full Orthodox, and so she did have to make a kind of break from her community. I mean, she wasn't ostracized. She's still on good terms with her family, but it was far more dramatic for her. And people in her family do regularly bring up God, although of course they don't use the word God. They use the word Hashem, the name.
Okay, I didn't realize that she was an Orthodox, and it's good that at least that they're still on good terms, because not everybody is. So. Well,
no, that's right, and there are, and I do see students who gravitate toward the Harvard humanists because sometimes they've had rather painful breaks from their families if they have a fundamentalist or Orthodox family background.
Right. And it's good that the Harvard humanists are there. I've seen that the Harvard chaplain is an atheist, or at least a humanist. So it's good that those kind of resources are there.
Yes, well, we have many chaplains. There's the Catholic chaplain and the Muslim chaplain and the Protestant chaplain and the Reformed Jewish chaplain and the Orthodox Jewish chaplain. So Greg Epstein is the humanist chaplain, and one of the few universities that has a humanist chaplaincy, and they elect among themselves kind of chief chaplain or head of the committee of chaplains, and so Greg was elected most recently.
Yeah. No, it's good that there's some support system there for these students, especially because we know universities are supposed to be bastions of ideas, which brings me to one of the quotes. I highlighted one of the quotes from your book, where you say, modern universities, oddly enough, given that their mission is to evaluate ideas, have been at the forefront of finding ways to suppress opinions. So that seems to be a rather ominous trend that we're seeing. This silencing of opinions, and the social justice warriors who are bullying professors into silence. So do you see that is this a trend that you think is going to peter out? Is it going to cannibalize itself, or are you concerned that it's going to continue?
I am concerned that it's going to continue because it is entrenching itself. It's taking over the positions of power. It's intimidating people into silence. And so, like other authoritarian movements, it can survive by punishing the criticism of itself. And there's just no conscience or compunction whatsoever about punishing people who disagree with its central canons. So that a regime like that can intimidate an awful lot of people into silence. And so I think there is a genuine cause for worry.
Right, and you and Rebecca and a number of other public intellectuals recently signed a document. Did you get any push? I can't remember. Was it with the Atlantic that did that, or was it a publication?
It was published in Harper's Magazine.
Harper's, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and did you guys get any pushback for that?
Not individually, but there were unintentionally ironic pushback against the entire letter, such as a journalist who said that she felt threatened because one of her colleagues writing for the same publication signed the letter, so she felt unsafe. Now, this is that kind of weaponizing disagreement so that it is grounds for accusations that you are actually unsafe. It was almost a satire on this kind of sanctified victim mentality and the fear of honest disagreement over controversial issues. But there it was, and there was that kind of resistance. There's also, I think, among some critics who missed the point, the criticism that the signatories of that letter were themselves in no danger of being canceled or losing their positions, which was not true, actually, of a lot of the signatories, some of whom were journalists who really were fired from their positions. But it misses the point in that, yeah, I'm a tenured professor at Harvard. I don't have to worry about my livelihood, but all the more reason for me to speak out for people who really can be effectively silenced, namely the students and the adjunct faculty and the non-tenured faculty and the postdocs and the bloggers and aspiring journalists who don't have that kind of job security. they need the people who do have the job security to speak out on their behalf.
Thank you for that. On behalf of all of them, I thank you for that and for having the courage. So, because I think a lot of people are too afraid. So it's nice to see that people are standing up and fighting back. So, okay, well, I have the president of AAI, Howard Berman, has read your book, and he sent me a question to ask you. He says, why can ignorance be a rational choice?
Oh, yes. Well, so you've probably seen the armored truck that picks up the bag of cash at the end of the day from stores, and plastered on the door it says driver does not know combination to the safe. So that very much works in the interest of the driver, namely that a carjacker can't pull out a gun and say, open the safe or I'll blow your brains out. Because if the driver doesn't know the combination to the safe, the driver can credibly say, I'm sorry, I just can't do it, I'd love to. And in which case, the carjacker, I mean, they could engage in wanton, pointless murder, but that incurs risks for them, and they're not going to get the contents of the safe. And so it's one of a family of what are sometimes called paradoxical tactics, a term originated by the political scientist Thomas Schelling in his classic book, The Strategy of Conflict, in which, in situations of bargaining and negotiation, there can be an advantage to being irrational or ignorant or out of control. One way of putting it is that if you don't know something, or if you don't understand something, or you can't figure something out, then your enemies can't make you an offer that you can't refuse, to take the line from the Godfather. That is, they can't coerce you with a threat if you don't understand the threat or if you are incapable of complying.
Okay. Interesting.
I mean, there are other cases where ignorance is rational, such as scientists conduct double-blind studies. They don't know who got the drug and who got the placebo. And if they did know, that would compromise their goal, their rational goal of scientists of finding the truth and circumventing their own biases. Spoiler alerts. We often want to be ignorant of how a movie turns out, or a novel, or if we're watching a recorded sports match, we don't want to find out who won so that we can enjoy the suspense of watching it unfold in real time, where we anticipate our own emotional reactions, knowing that some kinds of knowledge lead to involuntary cognitive or emotional consequences, and can choose, can take control of our own mental lives by choosing not to know something that would be upsetting or that would subvert some other goal that we have.
Okay, great. Okay, well, thanks for coming on. So do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to finish on, and some hope for the future? Yeah, I think there is, I do think there is momentum for humanism, and of course, atheism itself is just it's kind of a stepping stone toward humanism. It clears away bogus supports of moral commitments. And it is necessary not to get sidetracked by scripture, by commandments, by tradition, by authority, by dogma. But what it naturally leads to is a humanistic belief system, which I do try to explain in several of my books, including Rationality, because the question arises, can we rationally arrive at morally the morally best decision? And I argue that we pretty much can. Yeah, you have a great quote that I like in Enlightenment Now, that societies converge toward humanism. I really like that quote. So
over the long, I hope over the long term, yes, and I think there is some evidence for that.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. I know you're a really busy guy, and you're having to do a lot of interviews, so I really appreciate you taking the time to come on with us today. And I wish you all the best with the publicity, and we look forward to your next book. So I do really appreciate your time. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
Great. And so everybody, please remember to like and subscribe, and hopefully we can have Stephen come back again on a future episode. So take care, everybody, and we'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks for listening, and don't forget we're on YouTube, so follow us on YouTube. Just search for Atheist Alliance International and please subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're also on all of your favourite podcast platforms, so make sure that you follow us on there as well. See you next time.